The topic today is electrification of everything and how CCAs can play a role in advancing electrification through fuel switching, similar to what was just talked about at our plenary session. And we have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to just make a couple comments, and I'm going to turn it over to our panel. Started with a story. In 2006, I was working as a strategy consultant with one of the larger financiers of low-income housing tax credits in the country, a company called Muni May, based on the East Coast. And I was also doing strategy work for Earth Justice, a national litigation firm that focuses on environmental issues. And I got religion around climate change. And as part of that, was able to convince this low-income housing tax credit company that they needed to take advantage of this new opportunity to do financing of solar through the new investment tax credit legislation that came about in 2006, and particularly in California that same year with the California Solar Initiative. And at the time, if you had said to me, or if I talked to people about we're going to get this company that's going to finance solar, and 10, 12 years later, we're going to have people at a panel talking about the fact that, well, Commissioner Guzman saying, we don't have to worry about green anymore. It's there. We're on our way. If you had told me 12 years ago that that's going to be the attitude 10, 12 years from now, people would have laughed you out of the room. And I only bring that story up to say that, it does take the kind of relentlessness that David talked about at the panel this morning to advance change. But it's important to recognize that, with little wins, with small wins, with getting things started, being part of getting things started in those small ways, there's a great deal of satisfaction that comes when you see that policymakers and others say, well, we're there, we're going to get there. And I think that in the electrification of everything movement, as I would call it, or really the decarbonization of buildings and transportation movement that we need to focus on now, CCAs are really in a critical place. They don't have to solve the whole problem, but CCAs do have to, and I think should be, a part of getting those small wins going, starting those demonstration projects, getting the word out, making and normalizing the fact that getting off of gas and electrifying buildings so that they can take advantage of the fact that we're going to be having green sources of energy through electricity, that they need to play that part. We're on our way. We have, there's different components that need to come about, and we'll have some discussions from our panelists about what are those things. But for example, we have this legislation that Senator Henry Stern recently introduced, SB 1477, which would set up an incentive program somewhat like the role that the California Solar Initiative played 10 years ago, to send that market signal that, yes, we're going to commit to making a market, bringing the cost of these devices down so that electrification of everything can happen and get a momentum of its own. So with that introduction, I'm going to actually turn it over to Alice. We're just going to go down the row here. We're going to have each panelist take about 6 to 8 minutes. Only one panelist decided to go with slides, which is fine. Either way is good. But we'll leave the slides that Richard's brought to the end. And so we'll have 6 to 8 minutes for that. Please be thinking about your questions, because we do want to have some time for you to engage in some Q&A here. All righty? Before I go on, let me just ask, how many people in the room work for a CCA? Raise your hand. Okay, so I would say about a third. How many people in the room provide services, consulting or otherwise, to CCAs? Okay, maybe about another 25%. And then how many people in the room are extremely excited to be here, or can't wait to hear from the panel and want me to shut up and let them do their job? Okay. Alice, I'm going to give you the floor. We'll get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to speak about MCE's programs. I want to talk a little bit about why MCE has electrification programs as a CCA, and then talk about 2 of our programs and some of the efforts we have going on there. So,
could you just move the mic a little bit closer?
Sure.
Thanks.
So first off, why do we have electrification programs? GHG reductions is front and center in our mission statement. And not only do we see emissions reductions from electrification, but you also have the opportunity to improve or reduce the emissions from that installed equipment over time. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the M&V projects that we have going on to actually try to quantify what the emissions reductions are that we're seeing from fuel switching. We also see it as an opportunity to influence how, when, and where electricity is used. So, for example, with our EV program, by providing chargers in the middle of the day, it's sort of a light DR strategy for encouraging electricity consumption when the renewable electricity is available. And then finally, based on some of the projections we've done for our programs, we've found that if it's done well, it can actually be revenue neutral or revenue positive and contribute to the financial health of our organization and keeping rates stable. So I wanted to talk first about our EV program. This is a program that MCE launched this year, and we are aiming to incentivize or help install 540 chargers within our service area. And some of that is in partnership with PG&E through their program, where they're helping to pay for the infrastructure build out. So that's for workplaces and for multifamily properties. Some of the feedback we got on that program, so PG&E pays for the infrastructure build out at locations where there are 10 or more charger heads going in a single location. And some of our communities responded and said that was fairly restrictive and pretty high bar to set for eligibility for that program. So we also developed a complementary offering where we're offering up to $2,500 for sites that are not able to do 10 or more in a single location, so from 2 to 9 chargers. So like I said, 540 chargers this year. We're anticipating that will be a 3-year program and ramp up to almost 2,800 chargers over the 3 years. And then lastly, just to sort of round out the offering, we're also planning on offering vehicle incentives, especially for low-income customers. So either people who work at workplaces that are getting these chargers, or especially low-income multifamily properties. We would like to go in and provide those incentives to ensure that everyone has access to use the chargers that are being installed at their locations where they live or work. So currently we're about halfway to our goal for this year in terms of planned projects. And yeah, looking forward to see what we do over the next 3 years. The program goals here, like I said earlier, encouraging daytime charging just by making that available at the place where people are parking their cars during the day. And then down the road, we want to explore more active demand response programs or opportunities, which will be especially important at residences and multifamily properties where people are less likely to be charging in the middle of the day. We also want to encourage EV ownership, but specifically through closing the gap of what we see from the ideal 6-to-1 car to charger ratio. We anticipate a shortfall in that ratio within our service area. So just by making charging more accessible, we see that as a way of encouraging EV ownership. The next program I wanted to talk about is our heat pump fuel switching pilot program. And this is part of our low-income multifamily energy efficiency program. This is a larger program serving low-income multifamily properties with comprehensive EE upgrades. It blends funding sources from the CPUC, from the energy efficiency proceeding, and also from the low-income proceeding. And as a part of this program, we're targeting serving 220 units with heat pumps. So that's fuel switching, mainly from gas, a small number from propane. And because these are low-income properties, we're covering 80 to 100% of the cost of the heat pumps, depending on the amount of infrastructure upgrades that need to happen in addition to the cost of the heat pump. Some of the goals around this program, we're going to be doing extensive data collection on those heat pumps. We'll be measuring the GHG emissions from the gas equipment before we remove it, and looking very closely at the bill impacts to see how the heat pumps are performing in low-income buildings. We also will be measuring the impact on health and comfort of the residents through pre- and post-surveys before and after the retrofits. And then we'll be calculating the cost effectiveness and especially looking at some of the avoided costs of the gas safety testing and infrastructure upgrades that we will be avoiding. And then lastly, we're doing workforce training and developing a contractor list of contractors who are familiar with this technology and interested in doing this work. that can be a resource for future programs. So we did one training in partnership with Sonoma Clean Power, and we look forward to doing several more over the next couple of years. And then the last thing I just sort of wanted to touch on is the CPUC has decided to take up the three-prong test, which is a rule that measures need to pass to be eligible to use CPUC funding for fuel switching later this year. So one of the reasons why we have such a strong data collection emphasis in our heat pump program is we really hope that that data can be useful in informing those improvements. So the three prongs currently are that the heat pump cannot be represent an increase in source BTU consumption. The cost effectiveness has to be greater than 1, and it cannot increase emissions. The revisions that are being undertaken this year will clarify the test, ensure alignment with policy objectives, and provide guidance on how to meet those cost effectiveness objectives. And so we're hoping that the data that we can collect can inform that process.
Thank you, Alice. And you were right on 6 minutes, so you did your job. Now, there's a number of questions that have come up for me as Alice was talking. I'm going to hold those questions. Please jot down your questions. We're going to go through the panel, and then we'll open it to individual and panel questions. I'm going to now turn it over to Janice and let you get going and talking about your.
I decided to stand because I can't see the folks in the back. Oh, ouch. Sorry about that. You're all awake now. So Rick asked me in my meager 6 minutes to talk about what's happening in the storage industry. That is really, really hard. So I'd like to start with a quick survey. And this is subjective, so self-classification. How many of you would classify yourself as kind of new to the topic of energy storage in the power sector? Just show of hands. So new. How many folks have installed a storage project and a power wall at your home counts? Anyone? Okay, so a few folks. All right, good. So that helps me know where to start. As Rick mentioned, I'm the CEO of Strategen, but I think the main reason I'm here is I co-founded the California Energy Storage Alliance about 9 years ago, and I also co-founded the Global Energy Storage Alliance. And in keeping with this morning's panel, the reason that I'm here and so excited to be here is what gets me out of bed every day is the prospect of decarbonizing the world in which we live and doing it in a fair and equitable way. Those programs are so super cool. I don't know where Nick is. I live in Berkeley, so I think Nick needs to get going. Nick Chassett, that is. We're going to rib him later, because I want to sign up for all of them. Okay, so quick thing about storage. And I apologize for talking really fast, because I'm going to keep it to 6 minutes and talk about what's happening in storage and augment what's already been shared about what can be done by CCAs with storage to do fuel switching and decarbonize the world. So first thing, survey was taken this morning. Every person in the room had an iPhone. So point number one, storage is already part of our everyday lives. I mean, in your car, in your phone, in your laptop. I mean, we touch it all the time. Two, the best way, and there was an analogy given this morning about the health of the ecosystem, and it's the whole patient. I love talking about the human body. Like your body is the perfect metaphor for the power sector. Always has to be energy supply and demand constantly in balance. And the reason we can function effectively and make it from meal to meal is because we have a little onboard storage. And just like our bodies, those love handles, they come in all shapes, sizes, maybe not always on the hips in different places. Energy storage is the same way. It's like putting a little love handles throughout the power sector. It comes in many forms, many different types, long duration, short duration, you can put it anywhere. And by virtue of having a little bit of onboard inventory, makes the whole system operate more efficiently. Another metaphor I like to talk about of energy storage, and when I say energy storage, I mean all kinds of storage. It's not just battery storage. It could be thermal storage, it could be pumped hydro storage, it could be hydrogen storage, another kind of lesser known electrochemical storage. Another metaphor, so everybody's heard of Airbnb. You can think of storage as like the killer Airbnb app for the power sector. You know, in our power sector, like 5% of our capacity is used less than 50 hours a year. I think that's a statistic from PG&E. 25% is used less than 10% of the time. And that was the whole idea behind Airbnb, right? You have this vacation home or your own home, it's not very utilized. Let's use this cool app and figure out how to increase utilization to lower cost and make money. Storage can do the same thing. And don't worry, I'm gonna get to the CCAs on specifically where we can do that. Third, another metaphor, jam. This is from Senator Nancy Skinner. She's a brilliant senator and came up with this metaphor, but the world's first storage, well, human storage, besides love handles, was bottling fruit. You know, fruit ripens once a year, it rots, it's not very valuable unless you eat it right away. By putting it in a jar, adding a little sugar, you can store it. It increases its value and you can eat it whenever you want. Same thing with energy storage, you can bottle sunshine. Okay, next metaphor, bacon. This one is attributed to Joe Heinzman. He now works for GE, but I say storage is like bacon. It goes great with everything. You know, bacon and eggs, bacon and meatloaf, bacon margaritas. I've even seen bacon donuts. Now we have storage standalone. We have storage with solar. We have storage integrated. I heard somebody's doing it with a coal plant. Storage at gas peakers. And so by integrating and hybridizing, it can actually improve the underlying asset value. Storage is T&D. That's a key part of the Oakland Clean Energy Initiative that Nick and PG&E are doing. And then finally, the last metaphor I'll talk about with storage is it's like a laptop. And historically, if you're as old as I am, when we were in school, we all learned how to use typewriters. Nobody buys a typewriter anymore because you can use one of these things to produce great word processing documents, but you can also do spreadsheets, you can entertain your kids, you can play Fortnite. The idea is this is way more expensive than the typewriter that I used when I was a kid. Well, we don't buy typewriters anymore because this thing is so much more valuable. And that's the idea behind energy storage. It's one of the beauties of this asset. You put it anywhere on the grid and one asset can do multiple things. So look at the net benefits versus just at least cost is the metaphor. So the reason I talk about all these metaphors is those are the trends. And what's really different today than even 5 years ago in California is that all those metaphors now are being commercially deployed. And many CCAs, Marin, you guys are doing, it's happening everywhere. And I would say the main thing that's different from 5 years ago is 5 years ago there was a lot of opposition, people weren't sure. We now have quite a few commercial, very large-scale RFOs under our belt here in California and all over the world. So I would say that storage is definitely part of the toolkit. More and more applications are emerging as being cost-effective and viable. And I know I'm probably running out of time, but what I would say is especially CCAs, and given this great equalizer with local communities, there's a huge opportunity for behind-the-meter storage in tariff design. And I think the way you stated it, Alice, was encouraging folks to charge when it makes most sense for them and discharge when it makes most sense for them and the grid. So specifically, I think there's a huge opportunity to take advantage of the multi-use benefits of storage, whether you're procuring it from a large-scale, sort of in front of the meter long-term contract, solar plus storage. You may have heard in the news that there are now PPAs, long-term PPAs being signed, solar plus storage under 5 cents kilowatt hour. It's pretty amazing. But you can also procure storage from behind the meter in an aggregated fashion. And that's where I think the innovation and creativity and the ability of CCAs to come up with innovative tariffs that use the storage asset behind the meter to help the customer manage their bill, but also preserve some capacity of that asset to aggregate and maybe provide local capacity in RA. Or if the grid goes down, greater resilience, especially in key neighborhoods. Am I getting the cut? Okay, I'm gonna cut that. But anyway, it's very exciting, and thank you all for what you're doing, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Janice. And we will have time to dig deeper in some of the things during our Q&A period. I'm going to now introduce Panama Bartholomew from the Director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition.
Now for some more love handles. So thank you all for coming to the best panel of the conference. We appreciate you guys all coming out for this. Rick and I are from the same community as Jeff Cyphers in Sonoma County. And so we just went through the worst wildfire in California's history. We had 44 people killed, over 210,000 acres burned, and 90,000 climate refugees pour out of the burned areas into other parts of our community. I think many times, at least for me, before that, I always thought of climate refugees. I thought of them as other countries, and it really hit home when the community that Rick and I live in, Petaluma, accepted 25,000 people into all of our churches, our community centers, our fairgrounds, for weeks on end, until they could finally pour back in. And so we're starting to see the impacts of climate change right here, right now in California, and none of us should be surprised. These were the exact things that we've been told for decades by climate scientists that would be happening if we didn't start reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so I'm very appreciative of all you coming to this session and all the work that you're doing out there to do exactly that, so that we can be preventing these kind of disasters happening across California and the world. And the world part is what we constantly get in the legislature about complaints about California being such a leader. Time and again we hear, well, California is only 2% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and we're off on this crazy journey to try to save the world when we have such a small impact. And I just got back from living in Europe for 4 years, and I can tell you that Europeans are not the biggest fans of Americans, but they love Californians. And it's probably the highest compliment a European can give. That goes, oh, Californians, they're so much like Europeans. And particularly in the energy sector, they are watching us. They're watching what we're doing here in hopes of learning what they can take back and apply on the ground in Europe. So the structures, the policies, and the programs that we're developing right here, and CCAs being at the front end of leadership on that, are being watched and really going to be providing the leadership that we need on total decarbonization, not only here, but really around the world. So how are we doing in California? I think we're doing okay. We're doing okay on vehicles. We have big goals. We have comprehensive programs around fuel and technology. We're doing okay on the grid. We got the right kind of policy. We got really good advancement. And I say we're doing okay because we're not doing well on buildings. If you listen to an Amory Lovins speech from 40 years ago about all the market barriers for energy efficiency, he could give that same speech in 2018 about all those same market barriers. And then when we talk about decarbonization and fuel switching, it adds a whole nother layer of market barriers in place. And so we really need to finally make progress on buildings. And what that means is really buildings represent about 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state. If you look at it from an actual use of production of greenhouse gas emissions, 75% of the state's electricity goes to power buildings, and then about 13 to 14% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state come directly from buildings, mostly from our heating systems. And at some point this year or next year, depends on some contracts, our building sector will be a greater contributor of greenhouse gas emissions than our electricity sector. That's partly due to the great work we're doing on our electricity sector, but it's an even larger part about the lack of progress we're making on our building sector. So what that means is we need to be quickly getting away from fossil fuel use in our buildings, and the fossil fuels that are being delivered through our incredibly leaky pipeline system, we need to fix that system. With natural gas, it's always been considered a bridge fuel or a natural gas. What we're finding is that if you have any kind of a leakage rate throughout a natural gas system over 2%, it negates any of the climate benefit of natural gas compared to coal for energy. And what we're finding now is research coming out that from well to home, we're having as high as 5% leakage rate for California from where our gas is being produced through its transportation and then to our homes. And so we're actually, I'm not going to say we should go back to coal, but we're not having the climate benefits that we expected from natural gas. So when we're looking at really decarbonization of buildings, we're looking at basically two options that constantly come up. We're looking at biomethane, or we're looking at electrification. And biomethane, I'm willing to have the conversation, but I'm very dubious at this point. If you look at recent studies coming out, if we were to maximize all of the biomethane resources in California and only put them in buildings, forget about the transportation sector, and then we're to take California's share of all the biomethane resources across the United States, we'd have 1/3 of the natural gas demand that we currently have in buildings in California. We're going to have to start growing energy crops, displacing food crops. I'd love to have the conversation, but I'm incredibly dubious. Then you're going to have to put that into the same leaky gas transmission system that we currently have. And so we're going to have those same biomethane molecules, and the methane molecules be leaking out of that same system. So if we're going to be doing biomethane, we're going to be prepared for very high natural gas costs. We're going to have to redo our grid significantly. And so what that leads us towards is something that's really ready to go right now, and that's electrification. We have all the technology we need right now. It could be improved, and it will improve, but we have all the electrification we need right now for space heating, water heating, and cooking. We have a grid that's getting increasingly greener, and it's ready to go. And so what's missing? What's keeping us back from doing this? Well, it's really leadership. And the leadership opportunity for CCAs is dramatic. Alice talked about the benefit for EVs for CCAs. Basically, electrifying a home within a CCA district is the equivalent of putting an EV onto your customer through your customer programs. If you look at electrifying a home and adding 2 EVs, you're basically doubling your customer base for a CCA, and you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2 or 3 times what you'd be getting through your renewable energy and energy efficiency programs. So I would hope that as we see this growing CCA movement, that electrification is at the front end of all of your programs moving forward. We have challenges. I think we have to make some real innovations around rates, and I think there's a real conversation around rates, and particularly around baselines for electric water heating. But I think as far as from a technology and an understanding perspective, we're much farther along than biomethane. So I'll end with really the 4 things we need, and thank you, Rick. We really need public policy engagement. You heard it really clearly from Commissioner Hochschild, that it's only through broad coalitions that we actually make change within California. So we need a broad coalition speaking with one voice. We need to be digging in on some of the research topics that are still outstanding in the space, particularly a good quality grid at high levels of renewable energy. We need to be working together on market transformation around space heating and water heating, and we need to be doing a lot on consumer education. And so that's what we're doing at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. We're bringing together utilities, labor, local governments, environmentalists, builders, real estate community, and the finance community all in one coalition to do all of those together. I think we're about to announce that the Cal CCA is going to be a founding member of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and I welcome all of the CCAs to join us in this conversation so we can roll out the programs we need to meet our climate goals. Thanks for coming to the best session. Appreciate it.
And our last panelist, and again, let me continue to encourage you to jot down your questions because we really want to get into it in a few minutes here. But our last presenter is Richard Shorsky, who's the director of the ZNE Alliance and EV Alliance.
Thanks so much, Rick. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to CCAs on EV because what I'm seeing around the state is that CCAs are starting to take an extraordinarily strong leadership position on EV and really become perhaps the primary catalyst for EV market acceleration in the state, which is saying a lot because we've got a state that's pretty much all in on EV. But I think both the Sonoma program, the Marin program, soon the PCE program, and others that I apologize for not mentioning that I may not know about yet across the state are really setting a trend for load growth, frankly, and as much as you can reduce load through efficiency, you will gain a lot more back in EV if trends for EV adoption continue. So I think from a straight-up business standpoint, there are reasons why you have the IOUs getting hundreds of millions of dollars of CPUC approved ratepayer benefit money going to EV, and why the CCA community is starting to invest its own revenues in EV. There's a ton of load growth there. See if I can get this moving appropriately here. I think I can. So EV Alliance was founded in '09, and we focus on planning, infrastructure, and market acceleration. We've done a bunch of EV action plans around the state and a few abroad, and done a lot of best practice guidance documents. Some of them are mentioned there. And one of the things that we've done that I'm particularly pleased about, which has to do with the regional PEV coordinating councils. All of you should have engagement with a regional PEV coordinating councils. There's, I don't know, 10 of them or so around the state that were set up in part with CEC funding. And each of those has an opportunity to create a coordinating body for IOUs, CCAs, OEMs in the auto space, and EV service providers. And they are a great place for putting together successful funding proposals and collaborative relationships among the IOUs and the CCAs, with several $100 million now being deployed, a couple $100 million per IOU, in concert with the Electrify America funding. This is the time to make sure that you're aligned with the IOUs on where you want infrastructure, make sure that your sites are getting the attention of both Electrify America, that's the VW settlement money, and the IOUs, because they, for better or worse, are the deciders about where a lot of this infrastructure goes. But CCAs have a lot more local knowledge, and they frankly should be in the forefront and can be in the forefront of siting decisions for a lot of that infrastructure. I'll just mention that one of the projects that we're engaged with is a so-called e-fleet accelerator. This is something that any CCA could do, where you basically target the fleets that have the most visibility and the most potential for GHG reduction. They could be school bus fleets, they could be transit bus fleets, they could be delivery fleets. All of those are exceptionally high-profile opportunities where there is substantial HVIP incentive money from CARB. Many of the incentives bring the cost down right at parity with the diesel equivalent. So for example, a school bus incentive could be around $100,000. That more than covers the difference between the diesel and the electric equivalent. Lots of opportunity to partner and bring attention to the fleets on those programs. Just for those who are not aware, this is the basic overview of what the costs and what the charging rates are for the current generation of EVSE. I'm not going to go through this, but you can get a quick look. There's a very interesting, at the bottom of the chart here, the 350 kW chargers. This is an emerging standard. Through the Electrify America program, you're going to start seeing these pop up around California roadways. Right now, there's not a lot of vehicles that can accept that charge rate, but this is going to change the paradigm of EV driving to a more like a gas station paradigm, where you're going to get 250 miles in 15 minutes. You know, do the math, a third of that in 5 minutes. That is more like a gas station experience. Probably take us about 5 to 7 years before most cars on the road are at that charge rate, but that's a real game changer. And of course, the infrastructure costs and frankly, the megawatts that would be required for a multi-port deployment of what's called ultra-fast charging are going to be very, very substantial. PCE, among others, is really starting to look at, and now there's a PG&E map, kind of a heat map of where DC fast charging can go based on circuit availability, and I would encourage you to get involved in those planning exercises, because this is the new wave of charging standard, is that super high voltage. So value of smart charging, this is an amazing phenomenon when you get down to what the flexible load is going to look like as we head toward the state goal, and frankly, we will be getting there, of a couple million vehicles by 2025 to 2030. RMI did a really interesting demand flexibility report that they noted that every kilowatt of flexible load can avoid $140 a year in T&D investment and $60 a year in generation and ancillary service costs, for a total of $500 a year in avoided costs through EVs. Now, not all of that is monetized, as we know, in terms of programs, but that is going to be happening, that those T&D deferral costs will get acknowledged and somehow programmed into the system. E3 worked with ZNE Alliance on determining managed charging benefits, and there we had each EVSE roughly represents about 12.5 kilowatt hours of energy flow a day, with a peak power of 6.5 kilowatts, a typical residential or workplace level 2 station. If you look at just a fleet of 1,500 EVSE, you get 9.8 megawatts of VGI services could be available, or 18 megawatt hours a day of flexible load. 2 million PEVs deployed, and you have 25,000 megawatt hours a day, or 13,000 megawatts in VGI services. So think about that. Our whole ramp right now is 13 to 15,000 megawatts. Now, not all EVs, of course, are V2G enabled, but we will see that means two-way energy flow. But just to be able to defer charging when you have 2 million EVs potentially charging in a peak period, obviously all that needs to be deferred to the off-peak. And when we get a substantial number of EVs with two-way energy flow, which almost all the buses and trucks are equipped with two-way energy flow out of the factory now, we will have very substantial flexible load in the EV world. I'm not going to go through the rest of these numbers, but you can see the magnitude here. And the value magnitude is huge. Again, 2 million EVs, that's roughly $820 million a year worth of flexible capacity. And the key is they're going to be dynamic dispatch and price signals. So right now we have TOU rates, which is great for EV or special EV rates, but to be able to actually ping the charger and modulate charging is the way to get that capacity value maximized and optimized. And that is available now through some programs. eMotorworks and SCP have worked together on a program like that, and that's available in a number of utility territories. So real quickly, we're about to be carpet bombed with money for infrastructure, which is just fantastic. 134 million coming out of CEC this year. It's not totally approved yet, but it's likely to be. It's in the governor's budget. CARB, the so-called Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, the VW Electrify America plan, has hundreds of millions of dollars. This doesn't even count. There's a Prop 39 fund for EV that's going to be about EV school buses. That's going to be about 70 million. And all of this is available potentially to CCAs if they want to get in on the action to be effectively a hub for EV work. IOU programs, this is a quick look at what's out there. As I said, a couple $100 million each in PG&E and SCE, heavily oriented towards fleets, medium and heavy duty, which is very appropriate. For every charging station for a medium and heavy duty vehicle, you get tons more GHG benefit per charging station, if you will, than for a light duty vehicle, which often are pretty clean these days. So getting rid of diesel is really the big opportunity for GHG. And one more minute. So very quickly, the CCA EV programs, Sonoma Clean Power has really got, in many ways, a bellwether program in terms of just showing robust investment. So they pay for the smart charger now. A customer pays tax and installation, and they link that with the upgrade to the 100% green, which I think is a very creative approach. Their incentive, it's of course limited in volume, but it's $2,000 per EV and $3,500 for care customers. Really great kind of pro-equity approach. They negotiated discounts with a bunch of dealers, which is fantastic. They also included used EV incentives, which I think is a really important approach. And there's some stats on utilization of the program. Peninsula Clean Energy is getting in on the action. Very similar program, focus on MUDs. They're going to work with a family service agency that already has a used EV program, which I think is a very creative approach to deploy the dollars for used EVs in a targeted way. So here's a kind of just quick list. This is my last slide. This is pro tips on acceleration for CCAs. Funding, organize regionally to develop competitive proposals, collaborate with the IOUs, provide incentives to enroll EVSE owners in the smart charging programs or create them. Again, the SCP eMotorworks example. Ride and drive events can be huge for market acceleration. We did one in the Bay Area with a company called Reach Strategies that does these professionally. We had 12% conversion to sales within 6 months of everybody who drives an EV. Thousands of vehicles were sold through that program. It's amazingly effective. Highly recommend it. Incentives for EVSE and MUDs, that's our toughest challenge. If you want to allocate resources, that would be a very high leverage thing to do, and engaging the fleets proactively, as I mentioned. So lastly, just think broadly, e-mobility solutions are now in 2-wheel and 3-wheel formats. This isn't the bigger load, but frankly, this is a huge impact on mobility options in a community. If you go to San Francisco, you'll see electric bikes, electric scooters. Sacramento's getting in on the action, lots of communities. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to take questions later.
Okay, where's my volunteer who's going to carry the mic around? Okay, just while we're waiting for that, I'm going to just throw one question out at you guys. Yesterday we had a workshop on CCAs, the risks and benefits of CCAs, accelerating their involvement through programs, rates, whatever, in the deployment of DERs, including electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, and so forth. And one of the things that came up, we have one of our participants yesterday who said one of the big obstacles was it's complicated, right? Wasn't that the theme? And so how do you see us getting over that problem? Because look, the state has directed through the CPUC billions of dollars into energy efficiency programs, and as Panama said, we're just not there. We haven't gotten there. We haven't gotten the acceleration, the normalization of this conversion in any meaningful way. What are some of the things that you all think we can do, the CCA community can do, to make it less complicated, to get past that basic psychological obstacle? I'm a psychologist, so that's going to be my first question. Anybody have thoughts about that? Go ahead, Janice. Yeah.
So I'm not as familiar with the efficiency programs, but for behind-the-meter energy storage, there is this program called the Self-Generation Incentive Program. It's quite generously funded. The last go-around, I think the state put about $250 million. It's a bit of a misnomer. It started out as a DG program, but now 85% of the budget is set aside for behind-the-meter storage, and there is a carve-out for low income, which is not getting as utilized as it could. So one role of the CCA perhaps may be to understand these programs and help particularly low-income communities translate what this may mean for them and facilitate access. So I think that these are market sectors that maybe historically haven't been as well served by the private sector, and so there's a role for an ambassador and also as the load-serving entity to create a package to make electricity rates more affordable by tapping into existing programs and making it easier to understand for local constituents. And then secondly, as we heard through Marin and the other CCAs, provide job training so that many of these benefits and the jobs can be provided by the folks who actually live there.
Pamela?
So the question is how to make it less confusing or complicated, and my answer is CCAs. That's the way we need to make it less complicated. The beauty of fuel switching and the beauty of decarbonization is it's really simple. And don't get involved with all of the energy efficiency programs. It's very simple. It's your hot water heater, it's your space heater, it's your cooking, it's your gas cooking. And putting together programs to be able to run there for CCAs, that's your biggest bang for your buck from a greenhouse gas perspective. And it's a very good way to immediately give something to your customers without involving the complexity of the PUC's programs and energy efficiency mess, and trying to explain comfort and different times and all these other complicated issues that go into energy efficiency. CCA innovation is the answer to the complexity of our building problems.
So I think it's really important just to start doing programs. I also think it's really important to collect data and start understanding how the programs we're running fit in with everything else that a CCA is trying to do. So if you can really value the electrification work you're doing and show how that contributes to procurement goals and how everyone's working together towards the same goal, I think having that data and the value there can simplify sort of the decision anxiety, or there's a lot that you can do, and so I think having that clear value can simplify things.
Can I have one more suggestion?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I just went to Australia a couple months ago, Western Australia, and the utility there is experimenting with a lot of creative new customer offerings that kind of reminded me of my cell phone plan, where it's, you would get, it was basically demand and energy, and you had 5 choices, and if you were able to reduce your demand, and this is at the residential level, you would get kind of toggle switch. And then they also offered a basket of tools to help you fit within those categories. And I was thinking to myself, because I live in PG&E service territory, and I have an EV, and I have solar on my roof, and I just couldn't patch together all the different things. And I thought, wow, this would be so great if my CCA could just boil it down and be like, okay, if you do package A and you put in storage and you do the solar, your marginal rate's going to be this. And then if you kind of go above that demand rate, your marginal rate's going to go to this and your demand's going to go to that. And it's just really simple. And it kind of I'm probably explaining it really poorly, but it reminded me of my cell phone plans. Like package A is $50 a month, and then there's $70, then $100, but these are the things you had to do to go with it. So I think that kind of simplicity would be really helpful as a consumer.
Well, the shameless promotion I'll make right now is that, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with LCE and PCE under a National and Renewable Energy Lab grant in partnership with the Center for Climate Protection to come up with rate designs and ways of implementing rate designs that do exactly what you're talking about. So check in with us over the next 6 to 12 months. We'll see how it's going. And also, on the other side of it is what Alice is talking about, the work we're doing through the CEC with MCE to be able to get the data together that allows you to identify how would the implementation of a heat pump or of a storage device, where is that going to provide that multiple benefit, both to the customer and to the CCA in terms of managing its load. I'm going to do one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience, and this is another psychological question, but it goes back to my experience 12 years ago when I'd sit down with a school district, and I'd say, well, let's take a look at your energy usage, and I'd say, so let's look at your lighting, let's look at your heating, let's look at your building envelope, because you invited me in to talk to you about solar, but really, before you do solar, we really need to reduce your load by putting in these various energy efficiency devices. And what do you think the number one response I got was? Well, yeah, that energy efficiency stuff is really nice, but I really want to have solar panels, right? I want to have solar panels in my parking lot, and I want to have solar panels on my roof, because that's what's really cool. How do we make electrification cool? Right? What are some of the ways that, and I'm putting this out to the panel, but I actually want to put that out to the audience. How do we, you know all what I'm talking about, how, doing solar was the cool thing, right? How do we make electrification cool? I know EVs are cool. Richard, we're cool. We got that covered. But how do we make electrification of buildings cool? Any thoughts about that? I've stumped my panel.
Well, I guess just as someone who's spent the last 4 years working on energy efficiency alone, I already think electrification is pretty cool, and I think a lot of other people do too. But I think kind of exactly what you said, so one thing at MCE that we try to do is package all of these cool things with everything else that we want to do. So, for example, with low-income multifamily housing, we have EE programs, we have electrification programs, we have solar programs, and soon to have EV programs. So. Just that packaging of everything together.
Yeah.
It's not cool. It's inherently not cool. Heating technology is never going to be cool. And that's why we need programs. And that's why we need collaboration. And that's why we need leadership to be able to make sure that when you're replacing your hot water heater or you're replacing your space heater, that there are educated contractors that are there with good programs from CCAs to say, here's the option. Here's the better option. It's safer, it's cleaner, it's cheaper. It's not cooler, but it's safer, it's cleaner, and it's cheaper. And here's what we're doing.
We finally found something we can fight about. I think it's cool. And I think the way you make it cool is, that adage, what you focus on is what you get. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we have the wrong metrics. I support 100% renewables, but I agree with what was said earlier. It's not about the percentage of renewables, it's about zero carbon in every hour of every day, and in a way that translates to lower cost. And I think no matter what your political angle or even what you believe about climate change, everyone likes to brag about saving money, right? Look at Groupon. I mean, a whole company exists just on that concept. So if we can make And this is what CCAs are all about, is achieving that every hour of low GHG at low cost and get people to brag about it. I mean, I think that would be super cool.
Okay, we have a question right here. Okay, sorry. Then we'll go back there. I apologize. And say your name.
This is Mary Neal from MRW and Associates consulting firm in the Bay Area. And I just had a thought about the coolness factor. It didn't seem to me that EVs were all that cool until like Tesla came along and made them cool. And I'm thinking of the heating sector of the Nest thermostat and how that connects to my cell phone, and that's kind of cool. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to tap into some of that creative marketing or
Go ahead, Richard.
make it fun that way.
Yeah, I think that's a super good point. I've just recently became acquainted with Powerly, which is one among many of the home energy management systems that's sort of app-based. It resides on your phone like most of them do probably these days. But it's real-time energy presentment, as they call it. It shows you what every appliance in the home is using, and you can gamify it however you want with the utility in terms of points for deferring your dryer cycle to the evening, deferring your EV to the evening, those type of actions. As we all know, Ohm Connect has a similar kind of gamification. It hasn't yet created a huge amount of load displacement, but it could, and maybe it will. So I think some of these programs are pretty well developed. Powerly's in about a dozen utility districts. I encourage people to take a look at the app and the programs. Because I think you're absolutely right. You got to have if there's a cool factor to be had, we got to find it and deploy it.
So my name is Eric Vium from San Luis Obispo. Question, this is actually a really timely conversation. We're in the process of building 5% of new homes for the community, 1,500 homes. And I worked with the developer and the council to agree in their development agreement to create zero carbon ready homes. And well, we're not there yet. And so I'd like to follow up afterwards for details.
Ann said to celebrate, so
Yeah.
I'm going to celebrate. Yeah.
It's a big thank you. It's a big deal. So the challenge that I ran into with the developers was really, the developers and the planning commission. One from the developers was around the cooking, was that there's a deep attachment to cooking with gas, and that people were unfamiliar with induction cooking and that experience. So I'm interested in comments around that and how best to overcome that barrier, because I think we'll all be encountering that. And then the second being the coincident peak load in terms of evening ramping with induction cooking. That seems to be counterproductive to what we're trying to do, and so can you please address that as well?
I would call that a Panama softball. Go ahead, Panama.
It wouldn't be a talk about decarbonization unless we brought up gas stoves. So thank you for doing that. Have you checked out the Smud electrification program they just rolled out? $9,000 per home for full electrification. A little bit of it is for each technology, and then they give an adder to the developer for going all in on electrification. So it's a great program. A ton of research went into it that I think will be really handy for you to roll out. And for all of you CCAs, check it out. Just rolled out about 3 weeks ago. They have a existing building retrofit program for each technology, and they give you an adder if you do all in, and then a new construction up to $9,000 per home. And you combine that with not putting in all of the natural gas infrastructure to each home and the infrastructure inside the home, and a significant savings to a home developer. So on gas cooking, people consistently, and the gas companies will tell you that people like to cook with gas. And what I would say is, do you like to cook with gas, or do you like the performance of gas? Do you like the speed and the uniformity of gas? Or do you like the flaring of natural gas within your home and the attendant pollution and indoor air quality impacts that come from that along with it? I would guess you're talking about the performance. Recent research by LB&L has come out in just the last 2 years that show they looked at 60,000 homes in Southern California, and what they found is those communities that don't use their range hoods, you have pollution levels inside the homes of sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, NOx, and formaldehyde at levels that have been unacceptable for outdoor air quality. And because it's indoor air quality, we can't do anything about it. There's no way to really crack down. If that was outdoor at these levels, we'd be cracking down and people would be getting arrested and fined. This is most critical for formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a leading cause of childhood leukemia in the world. 1 in 3 children that get childhood leukemia die, and formaldehyde is one of the main killers of family pets inside the house from external factors such as this. And so it's an incredibly critical issue that if you're not going to replace your gas stove with an electric induction stove, which are amazing, and all of the culinary schools in New York are using them, and all the big French Laundry uses them, all the big, really great restaurants use them, please use your range hoods. Because if you took a big step back, we would never design a community in this day and age where you're flaring natural gas in your kitchen next to your children and other sensitive receptors. And so I'd be happy to pass on some of that information to you and some of the good work that the producers of induction stoves are doing.
Whenever I am at a restaurant where I see that they use an induction stove, I text Panama. Another one. There was one in his hometown just a couple weeks ago. I think we have time for 2 more questions, so this gentleman I saw first, and I'm going to give our executive director the last question.
So I just wanted to make a comment on the cooking. Nick Dunphy with TRC, we worked very closely with Smud and their electrification programs and devising their savings claim calculations and everything. And one of the big things we found with the developers is Smud has set aside dollars, and for new developments, when they have an open house, Smud will hire a chef to come in and do a cooking demo at the open house. And they will also set aside marketing dollars for those homes so that they can leave the Ferris cooking equipment in the homes when the homeowners move in, so that they have appliances that work. They have pans that work with their appliances, but they have had an education on how to use it as well. And we've got some pretty good reception from builders so far as taking advantage of these offerings.
Thank you. That's great. Ann, you want to wrap us up with the last question?
Sorry if you covered this, I came in late. One of the effective ways of pushing energy efficiency and renewable energy into our communities has been through the PACE financing program. And I wondered if you have covered what PACE could do to implement some of these innovative programs that you've been talking about here today.
If nobody on the panel wants to take it, is there anybody in the audience?
I'll briefly
Okay.
start. As far as I can tell, with PACE right now, you can basically finance anything, much to the chagrin of legislators in Congress, and it's a big problem for PACE administrators right now. But everything that we're talking around decarbonization of homes clearly fit in with the vast majority of those providers that operate in California, and it's an excellent program to be able to combine with the CCA incentive program to be able to roll this out across California. So I think it's a great point, Ann.
I actually just want to add quickly onto that. So along the lines of the theme of data collection and understanding the impacts of the programs we're running, so because of some of the stories around PACE that we've heard lately, we actually undertook an effort with Marin County to use AMI data to quantify savings from energy efficiency projects funded through PACE, and found overall savings for sure. I don't remember the exact numbers, but kind of in line with what we would have expected. So that was encouraging because we helped them set up their open PACE marketplace. So just wanted to offer that up.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions. Please let me ask you to thank our panel, and I'll also be thanking them with a small gift.